Hello, and welcome to Remember the Film, the podcast where, as Aunt Lucy always says, if we're kind and polite, the world will be right. I'm Jeff Grizz Ulrich, and with me as always is a real swell chap, Joshua Bradley. How are you today, Josh?
Hello, I'm well. I apologize for that, by the way. I apologize to anyone I've offended.
And of course, our trio would not be complete without a jolly good fellow, Hugo Panay. What's new with you, Hugo?
Howdy, partner. How you doing?
We deserve that.
We deserve that. I do love that every time someone from Europe wants to do an American, their go-to is howdy partner. All Americans
the
are
only thing I can
from West
say.
Texas.
It is.
I mean, that's how everyone talks in Los Angeles.
Everyone talks
so
like
he's right on.
Like people in Red Dead Redemption.
Oh.
That's what I think of America, right?
Well,
That's correct.
Thank you for indulging my mediocre British accent for a moment there. But there's a reason for it. Today, we are talking about two wonderful films that if you can't find any joy in, you're just not watching the same movies we are. These are Paddington 1 and 2, and we will briefly discuss Paddington before going on to Paddington 2 more in depth, which is, of course, our film to remember for this week.
We're on a run of incredibly British films.
I mean, that's true. We definitely
just kind of put that out there. Because we did Lawrence of Arabia. Like, we've been getting more British as we go. So we did Lawrence of Arabia, Shaun of the Dead, and now Paddington, which is possibly unless we do like a costume drama, like, I don't know, like Pride
Emma.
and Prejudice or Emma, like, this is the most British film we can watch.
What are you doing to us? This is your influence, Hugo. It's gotta be.
Yeah,
somehow you're subtly influencing us to pick these.
I'm subtly recreating the Empire, you know?
And I don't even think he has to work that hard, because truthfully, I love a lot of British humor, and you know, so of course this was right up my alley.
Next week we have to watch The Patriot to make up for it.
Oh god, American Sniper.
That movie's not very good. Neither of those movies are very good.
Oh
right,
yeah,
anyway,
maybe we shouldn't use those as the hallmark of American film, huh?
That's true.
I mean, in terms of like America versus Britain, like, give me a better movie than The Patriot. You can't. So it'd be The Patriot. I guess we'll go to Hamilton.
We could do Hamilton. We could watch Hamilton.
Yeah. You'll be back.
All right. Well, so
week after Mary Poppins. It is just a back and forth.
We just keep going back. That'd be brilliant. So Paddington 1, we're gonna start with that. Paddington released November 23rd, 2014 in the United Kingdom and January 16th, 2015 in the United States. It was directed by Paul King, who had otherwise mostly just been known for directing television shows. In the U.S., most people would probably only be familiar with Mighty Boosh, which played, I believe, on Cartoon Network for some time. Might still be on there, actually, in reruns.
I've never heard of that.
I haven't seen it, but as far as I know, it's kind of a very visually interesting comedy TV show.
For sure.
Yeah.
Oh, he also directed 2 episodes of Space Force on Netflix. You guys remember Space Force?
Did that get canceled already?
I mean, the comedy came and went.
Seen that?
And
I watched the
no
first
one
episode.
talked about it.
I watched the first episode. It was not great.
Well, you know, not everything is.
Not everything is. Well, the budget on Paddington 1, or Paddington as I should probably call it, because it didn't actually have a numeral in the title. Paddington had a budget of $55 million, which at the time was the most expensive movie ever made by the French production company Studio Canal. And it resulted in a worldwide gross of $282,377,683. So good on them for making a profit, right?
Yeah, and an interesting, in terms of the United States, an interesting domestic versus worldwide split. Made most of its money not in the United States. It only made $76 million in the States.
Which is, you know, not even by the standards of other British films being shown in the U.S. is not that much. Like, I don't know why this movie in particular did not capture the American zeitgeist.
Well, we'll talk about the history of Paddington in the UK versus the US, but also, like, this was dumped in January. Both the movies were dumped in January. They both came out MLK weekend, and, like, January is they call it dumpuary because that's where studios put the movies they don't think will do any kind of business. They just kind of put them there so they can put them out.
Yeah.
So
that's unfortunate.
Well, and this was based on a popular children's book series by Michael Bond called A Bear Called Paddington, the first book of which was released in 1958. Did you guys have any experience with Paddington prior to this movie? Obviously, Hugo has a Paddington bear, so he must have been at least moderately familiar with him. What about you, Josh?
I had not heard of Paddington before these movies, which just kind of makes me a little sad because I feel like he's a friend I could have, used as a kid,
Yeah.
What a lovely bear. And I'm glad he's in my life now, but yeah. I had no familiarity with him before the movies. And when, I kind of remember Paddington coming out in 2015, but he became more on my radar when Paddington 2 came out and was a big critical hit. But not a big box office hit.
What about you, Hugo?
Well, Paddington is one of those. My mom, obviously, I'm half British. I did go to England quite often as a kid. I never lived there, but I did go quite often. And one of my favourite places to go whenever we went to London to visit my family was Hamleys. Hamleys is a great toy shop in Oxford Circus, I believe. Or, well, around Oxford Circus.
And for those of you in the United States, it's not an actual circus.
No. It's like a square. Well, it's an area of London, I would say, where all the big shops are. And it's like this 5-story building that is all toys. And I remember as a kid, there's a specific area of that place that is just Paddington. And it's huge. You have Paddingtons of all different sizes. You have the one with the blue coat, the one with the red coat. And it's just kind of an icon that I always knew of as a child. Even though I'm not even sure, I'm not necessarily familiar with the books themselves. I'm sure my mum read them to me as a kid. But I don't even really remember them. But the figure of Paddington is very, very iconic to me, and especially the little tag, "Please take care of this bear," is what, as a kid, made me. Oh, this was my favorite little bear as a kid because it was like, he wants to, poor bear, he's alone, he wants to be taken care of. Yeah,
that tag shows up in the movie. That tag shows up in the movie, and I actually Googled that phrase because I was watching the movie. That touched me so dearly, and that's I think that's the title of the first chapter of the first book. I want to say is "Please take care of this bear."
I believe so. Yes.
Well,
and it's also
ahead,
if you look at the movie itself, it has the exact same font in the writing. So the actual they did the same thing. So it's great.
For me, I lived in London from age 2 to 6, so I was very, very small, and so of course Paddington was a part of my childhood. Which would be unusual compared to most Americans because he's not that prevalent over here. I think the problem is that Winnie the Pooh is the bear of choice in the United States, yes. And so we were all a lot more exposed to Winnie the Pooh.
Winnie the Pooh is also British, correct?
Yes, but for some reason, it just came down to it. Pooh won out, and that might be more popular. The Disney support is, I'm sure, a big part of that. But I did, especially in school, in kindergarten and all that, we read Paddington books all the time. So I was very excited when this Paddington movie came out because I was like, I haven't thought about Paddington in years, and God, the nostalgia just hits you so hard. It pulls out memories that you don't even remember having. So I was absolutely super stoked about Paddington. Let's go on with some more fun facts about Paddington. Paddington Bear is voiced by Ben Whishaw, or am I pronouncing his last name correctly?
I believe so, yes. Whishaw.
Ben Whishaw, who is also known as Q in the new Bond movies. However, he was not the first choice to voice our Paddington. It was Colin Firth was announced to be Paddington and had recorded a good portion of the movie.
That's wild to me.
Yes.
That's wild.
I don't know. I can't even imagine it.
That's what I was having such a hard time picturing. Like, why would you even cast him in the first place? I mean, he's obviously a very prominent British
actor.
Yeah, but like his voice is his voice coming out of a bear, a cute little bear,
especially like a cute little bear, because like Ben Whishaw gives it such. Although I mean, I'm sure he's a 40-year-old man or something, but
he is now.
Gives it, he gives it a very youthful, I don't know, innocent tone.
That's
that
exactly
I don't
right,
know if Colin Firth could have done. Like, I mean, I'm sure he can play innocent, but he wouldn't sound as youthful as
he
young
sounds
and wide-eyed. Like
Colin Firth's voice always gives me the vibe of someone who knows a lot. He sounds intelligent, and he has a certitude to his speaking voice that would not fit a bumbling bear at all. So I'm sure he would have been doing a voice of some kind. Just like Ben Whishaw was doing, but I have a hard time picturing it.
I mean, Colin Firth kind of naturally has like a higher register. He's got a pretty high voice.
Yeah.
So like I'm sure that could help, because like you just said, Hugo. When I picture Colin Firth speaking, like I picture an older person, and like the fact that Ben Whishaw can make his voice sound like a younger person really helps the character. But like, I'm sure Colin Firth would speak with a higher register to do Paddington, but like the fact that Ben Whishaw is more like soft-spoken, not necessarily higher pitch, but just soft-spoken, like that's what makes it really work for me. So like, I can't picture Colin Firth doing this at all. I'm sure he would have been fine, it just would have been different.
I also remember when the news broke that Colin Firth was no longer going to be the voice. I don't remember who it was, and I wish I could find it, but someone had tweeted that thank goodness that they're casting someone else as Paddington Bear. It's unfair that Colin Firth gets to play every important British character.
True.
Oh no, yeah, that's true.
The guy's the king.
Yeah, and Mr. Darcy.
And Mr. Darcy.
But not James Bond.
Nope, and probably too late for that now.
Would have been 3 for 4 though had he gotten Paddington.
Well, so the rest of the cast is rounded out with a great variety of British actors that are excellent. Hugh Bonneville, Sally Hawkins, Julie Walters, Jim Broadbent, and Nicole Kidman are all playing the main humans of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also have Imelda Staunton and Michael Gambon as Paddington's Aunt Lucy and Uncle Pastuzo. What do you guys think of this cast in Paddington 1?
Wonderful.
It's just delightful. Like, all these excellent British actors who are all very well known in Britain as theatre actors and film actors, but in this movie that is so unabashedly wholesome all the time, they're just so good. All of the actors are just amazing in this.
Do you guys know Sally Hawkins from much?
Shape of Water?
Yeah, I mean, that was the first thing I ever saw her in, but beyond that,
she's also been in a couple of Godzilla movies.
She wasn't something. She wasn't something that I knew of, but now it's kind of.
So since I saw Shape of Water, I recently in the last year saw Happy Go Lucky, which she's the star of, the Mike Leigh movie. Absolutely delightful, and that's kind of her character in that's kind of closer to this than to Shape of Water or Godzilla, where it's just like a very, I mean, the title says it, very happy-go-lucky, and I love her in these, and I think that anyone else would not have done the job that she does in these in terms of like getting you to just being sweet and like getting you to care. Yeah,
she's a great mom.
Yes.
And also I love that like she has ambitions. Like her character has ambitions. You know. Mm-hmm. That we see in both these movies, that she wants to be a writer, and she wants to in Paddington 2, she wants to swim the English Channel. I don't know. She just seems interesting.
And she's so also she plays awkward so well, because she's awkward, but not in a kind of an embarrassing way. She's really
in an endearing
awkward.
way.
Yeah,
endearing.
She's
awkward in a lot of the same ways that Paddington is awkward.
Yes,
and that makes it very, very lovable.
And she's the one who, in the first movie, like decides to approach Paddington when they see him at the train station, and like it's because of her that they end up bringing him home.
How great is that scene? Like, oh, look away, children! There's some sort of bear probably selling something.
But one of my favorite things about these movies is they do not acknowledge the fact that there's a talking bear. Oh,
correct. Yes.
He's around. Oh, a bear from Darkest Peru. He can speak, and it's
like,
just normal.
There's a little bit of like, oh, that's odd.
At the beginning,
he speaks.
That's odd, but it's but beyond that he just kind of fits in and it's okay.
Like in the second one, Hugh Grant's character Phoenix is like talking to a crowd of people, and he's trying to pick somebody out of the crowd, and he says, "Eeny, meeny, miny, bear." He's like surprised. He's surprised, but just kind of tickled, as opposed to being like shocked.
Yes.
So like you're right, Grizz. They're like, it's a little bit of acknowledgement of like, hey, that's kind of weird, but mostly just like treated as kind of normal. Like, you know,
there's something very British about that way of interacting with an unusual circumstance. Like that's a common thing in a lot of British comedy. That when something really bizarre is happening, they don't react in these shows or movies like it's as bizarre it is. It's always kind of quizzical, like, huh. Well, that is unusual.
I mean, even in Shaun of the Dead, you get that kind of sense.
Yes,
because they're kind of very casual about it,
very accepting about these unusual circumstances.
Yeah,
and I think that is one of the things I love most about these movies is just their eagerness to accept the bizarre, and it makes the whole thing more endearing. We'll
get into it, but there's a very very clear, I think, metaphor there, and it's not random that these movies are made in the moment that they're made, and that their theme is accepting something different that comes from abroad. But we'll get into that in Hugo's Politics Corner. Later on in the podcast.
So real quick, go ahead, Josh.
Well, as long as we're talking about the cast,
I was about to
6
bring
Degrees
this
of
up.
Harry Potter.
Yes,
okay,
6 Degrees of Harry Potter.
So I'm going to name an actor. I'll tell you who they play in Paddington, and you tell me who they play in the Harry Potter movies. Is that cool?
Let's give it a shot.
Okay. Are we going one by one, or just shout it out?
I say
one by one.
Out.
Okay.
Shout it out.
Shout it out. Okay.
Imelda Staunton was the voice of Aunt Lucy in Paddington. Who is she in the Harry Potter movies?
She's Umbridge.
Yes, Dolores
she is
Umbridge.
Dolores Umbridge. Very good. I think just the 5th movie, or she in
she appears in the later ones as well, but not in an important role.
So as long as we're talking about the voices of bears, Michael Gambon as the voice of Uncle Pastuzo.
Albus Dumbledore, baby.
He's the second Dumbledore.
Dumbledore number 2.
Dumbledore 2.
Well, I don't think they could have cast the original Dumbledore in Paddington.
Yeah, no, unfortunately.
I'll respect Richard Harris. I really enjoy Michael Gambon as Dumbledore. But Richard Harris was also great, so no shots. Julie Walters as Mrs. Bird in Paddington.
Mrs. Weasley.
She's Mrs. Weasley.
Molly Weasley, that's my daughter, you bitch, or whatever the line is.
Yeah, she's so good. She's so good in this. Whenever she opens her mouth, I'm just happy because she'll say something funny or do something funny. That she goes on. There's like a monologue at one point. I'm just shouting it out here, where she's talking about actors and how awful they are.
Yes,
and it's really meta because they're just standing around acting. Yeah. Talking about actors being horrible people.
They lie for a living.
And finally, Jim Broadbent as Samuel Gruber.
And
he's Slughorn.
Yes, Professor Horace Slughorn.
Professor Slughorn. And that has been 6 Degrees of Harry Potter. Thanks for playing, guys.
So much fun. And I admit, every time I see them in movies, I'm like, oh, it's Slughorn. And I'm always amazed. Oh, we missed, well, he'll come up in Paddington too, but Brendan Gleeson.
I forgot Brendan Gleeson. Yes, because you brought it up, I will say he plays Mad-Eye Moody.
Correct.
Mad-Eye Moody. Yes.
Yes.
I love Brendan Gleeson.
Every time I see them, I'm like, oh my god, it's Mad-Eye. Oh, look, it's Professor Slughorn.
Well, him less so. I only clock that he was in Harry Potter because this is a movie with so many other people who are also in Harry Potter. But normally, I have a relationship with Brendan Gleeson outside of his.
I do too.
Harry Potter character.
I mean, but this Bruges, is always, right?
Absolutely. This is always a fun game to play in my house because my wife read all the Harry Potter books but has seen none of the movies. So I'll be like, "Oh, that person's in Harry Potter," and she's like, "I don't give a shit." So fun times here.
Okay, well, so
fair enough.
While we're still talking about the cast, the next thing I wanted to ask about, Nicole Kidman plays the villain in Paddington 1. What do you guys think about her role as the villain in this movie?
I mean, she's fine. She's good.
Think she's
it's
great.
A good performance.
I think the performance is great. I just think because she's having so much fun just chewing the scenery.
Yeah, she's hamming it up.
Yeah, I do think though it is sort of the weakest part of the first movie.
I agree.
Just because it feels a little disconnected from Paddington's story.
I wasn't sure if you guys felt the same way I did. I felt it was a little her character's a little evil for evil's sake. Like the motivation. I mean, they try to explain the motivation
later on in the movie,
but for the majority of the movie, I'm just feeling like, why is she just an evil lady?
Yeah. Well, she's basically Charles Muntz, the villain from Up. She has the same motivation, pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah.
Or Cruella, kind of.
But I agree. It was a good performance, and because of how charming the rest of the movie is, I really don't mind that the motivation of the villain wasn't as fleshed out. Because I really don't think it was the central point of the movie.
Yeah, well, the central conflict is kind of outside of her. That's why she feels tacked on, and that's why she doesn't really need to. Her motivation doesn't really matter as much because she's kind of just an afterthought. Like her story, as it relates to the rest of the story, is basically an opportunity for Hugh Bonneville's character to finally stay up for Paddington in Paddington 1.
Well, so let's get into the most important question regarding Paddington. What do you think of Paddington? What are your general thoughts?
Like the movie or
the
about
movie.
our guy?
Well, I mean, I guess both, but the movie.
I love it. I think it's awesome. I didn't see it when it came out. Actually, the first time I saw Paddington, I had just got my tonsils taken out earlier that day, so I was on a lot of painkillers, and I wanted to watch something that would make me happy and put me in a good mood, and it was just what the doctor ordered. It was fantastic to watch on painkillers. I mean, regardless of whether or not I was painkillers, it was great to watch.
I think both these movies are just excellent.
I agree.
I think they are what family films should be all the time, or should try to be. That I think this is one of those movies I guess two movies that I hope they go down as kind of beloved family classics that people go back to in the same vein of an E.T. or movies like that, because I think they're that good in terms of how well directed they are, and because of the fact that they never really talk down to children. They are child friendly, but they don't assume that children are kind of dumb and enjoy, I don't know, because there's been a bunch of these movies that have been made where they get a live action animal that interacts with characters, and it's kind of a movie made for children. Like they've done Peter Rabbit, they've done the Chipmunks, there's a bunch of them, but they're always kind of dumb comedies where they do fart jokes and kind of dated pop culture references, and this is just a really, really well made movie that happens to star a CGI character and to be for children, but it's very enjoyable and very well made.
I'm glad you mentioned the pop culture references that come up in other kids' movies, because that is such a staple of other kids' movies, and I think it's one of those things that dates a movie right away, because future generations aren't going to have that connection to those pop culture references. The fact that they don't do pop culture references in Paddington and Paddington 2, for the most part, makes it so that they are, I think, more capable of being timeless children's films.
And I will say, the pop culture references that they do choose to do in these movies are so clever, because they're either visuals or they're music, and they're not on the nose at all. So if you know the reference, it's really funny. It's really cool to notice it. That there's a Modern Times scene. There's a scene from Mission Impossible. There's one scene, one shot that is specifically the same shot as a shot in Spider-Man 2. There's a bunch of stuff like that, but it's always visual. It's always subtle. So it's
and they don't tell you it's happening.
They don't tell you. Well, the Mission Impossible, they kind of really go for it, but at the same time, if you don't know, it's still an enjoyable scene without knowing that pop culture references, so it doesning really date the movie in the same way.
What do you got, Josh?
Something Hugo just said I want to touch on, I thought was really smart, that I'm thinking about what kids would take from this, you know, and I'm thinking about other popular kids movies the last few years, and what kids might take from that versus what they might take from this. And I don't have kids right now, but I'm spare thought for parents whose kids were into the Despicable Me movies and the Minions, and when they walk out of that movie, they are speaking nonsense gibberish like Minions, and slapping each other like the Minions slap each other. Not really behavior you want your children to emulate, but if your kid walks out of Paddington and starts emulating Paddington,
you have an excellent child now.
What a wonderful situation to find yourself in. Just, very polite and tipping their hat to everybody and using manners and loving marmalade. Should we should be also lucky to have that.
And I also think aside from just the messages of the movie, which are absolutely just delightful all around, even the fact that the movie is quality filmmaking, aside from the content of the movie, it's so well made that I think even the fact that for children getting into movies at the beginning, like in their early days, watching movies that are actually well made will also build their critical thought and their interest. Maybe they'll get into movies and growing up, they'll try to understand films a little better, or they'll like films that are, well made and not necessarily just because it's popular. And I think there's also an element of that making quality entertainment for children means getting adults that will watch quality, films, books, whatever it is.
I mean, that's true. Especially so much of kids' entertainment, like from the business perspective, is they make those things on reduced budgets. They want to save as much money as possible because they know that kids are going to watch this stuff anyways because of whatever marketing that they're going to push on this. And so they don't actually have to engage as much as they probably should to make a quality product, which you're absolutely right. Both of these movies, Paddington and Paddington 2, you can tell that everyone working on this movie cared about making a good movie and making a good Paddington movie. Not for a moment do I think anyone on this production was worried about the profit margin on this project. What do you got, Josh?
Well, all three of us like both the movies, but you guys are both talking about how good Paddington is. Like, what aspects stand out to you, particularly in Paddington 1, to make it a good movie to you?
Well, I mean, it's part of what makes it so good in the second one for me is Paddington in general is adorable and charming and all those great personality things, but also is just so seamlessly put into the movie. Like, you can tell he's a CG bear. It's not an Uncanny Valley situation, but he looks so soft, and it's still very detailed. And I think the way he moves is brilliant as well. And the way they shot this, they had animatronics on set for a lot of the stuff to so people could act with a Paddington. And then
I didn't know that. That's really interesting.
And then also, obviously, a lot of CG work done.
Just by the way, the CGI for the budget is stunning. Because a lot of movies that have triple the budget of this movie don't look as good, I don't think. Like, it's really well done.
Yeah, one of the things I put in the outline is Paddington's eyes. Whoever animated his eyes needs a raise, because like that, I think that's kind of is what both of you guys were saying. That kind of goes a long way to getting you to like sympathize with this little bear, his big, beautiful eyes that the camera looks into kind of a lot in this movie, and they're very expressive. And like you said, Grizz, he doesn't look quite like a real bear, but pretty close.
Yeah,
and like it's kind of an interesting.
It's not like the bear in The Revenant.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like a mix of like having a real bear and having a teddy bear is what it looks like. They kind of hit right in that pocket between the two.
The other thing I wanted to touch on in particular is the comedy of the movie. I've mentioned many times how this is a very British film. Both of these are very British, and it's hard for me to put into words exactly what I mean by that. But if you've watched a lot of British comedies, it's very obvious that this is a very British. I mean, like on top of the way they talk and the things they say, the actual comedy of the movie is Rowan Atkinson-esque, Mr. Bean type humor.
A lot of hijinks.
Yeah, a lot of hijinks, and people finding themselves in situations. They're charmingly befuddled, by all these situations, and I mean that's a staple of British comedy, and that again maybe it stems from me being a child in England and watching some of these shows, but I've always had a deep appreciation for that kind of humor, and we don't see it as much in American television. I think Hugo touched on it earlier. There is a certain level of dumbing down that occurs in a lot of American comedy. Like it's the comedy is to the lowest common denominator in a lot of ways. For British comedy, they don't always make the assumption that their audience isn't going to get what they're doing. They often assume that their audience is going to get it. And so it just feels a little more highbrow, even though it's about very, hijinks sort of stuff.
It's a bear not knowing how to go on the, on the stairs. What's it called? The escalators. Like it's a very simple concept, but the way they do it is so charming and funny that it kind of elevates the material itself. I also think the movie has just great direction in general. I think it's able to do some really cool action sequences as well. Like both the first one and the second, there's a very good chase sequence in the middle. There's a lot of like little visual gags that kind of you might even not notice on the first watch. Like, you know, the taxi, and she closes the door, it's taxidermist. Like there's very little things like that are just continuously interesting. And I think, Josh, you added this, the color palette and just the art design
vibrant
in general is so beautiful. It's always interesting to look at, which a lot of comedies, you know, often are not. And yeah, this is like, especially the second one, but the first one, both of them are, for me at least, they've always given me a kind of a Wes Anderson vibe. I don't know if you agree. Yeah. Like, it's kind of
certainly in terms of that color like palette, a kids movie. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, the color palette, and also like there's sequences where it shows like a cross section of the house or a cross section of the jail, like they're in like a dollhouse basically. And that's very Wes Anderson as well.
Yeah. It also does the top down shot on writing a lot. There's narration about the characters and what they're into. Like especially the first one at the beginning, where they narrate sort of what each character, where Paddington is writing a letter to Aunt Lucy, and he's narrating what all the individual Browns, what their deal is. That's very much, you know, I don't know, any Wes Anderson movie where they explain the characters at the beginning.
Yeah, and that's how the second one opens too. Same thing. Yeah.
Josh, what stood out to you?
Well, Hugo mentioned the color palette, but like I think the colors also, I think, are good in conveying a mood, and like it's very, very bright and sunny for the happy scenes, and like very more austere and gray and muted for the sadder scenes, and that in conjunction with the music, I think the movie is really good at conveying a vibe and an emotion, and like a, you know, making you feel a certain way, you know, ups and downs both. And I think that's a lot of why I like them, because you know, I'm feeling what the movie wants me to feel, and like it's effective at making you feel that. And also the performances, particularly from Hugh Bonneville and Sally Hawkins, who we've already mentioned, and Ben Winshaw's voice. But like basically anytime Sally Hawkins is like talking to Paddington, it's like pulling on my heartstrings. Like I love all the performances, and the reason these movies work in particular, yeah, they're very funny. Yes, there's hijinks. Yeah, they look good. Yeah, they're well written, well directed. But honestly, it's just like the emotional stuff that really works for me. Like Paddington trying to, you know, find a family, and like them taking him into their home and accepting him into their family and loving him. Like that's what really works for me the most. And I think that's mostly in the performances of Bonneville and Sally Hawkins.
The last thing I wanted to say about Paddington 1 before we move on to Paddington 2 was, you touched on briefly the music. The reason I want to bring it up is because it felt more obvious to me. Like they were the performances of, like in the movie, there's a band that is playing music on location in a lot of these scenes, and the music is sort of a Caribbean feel to it. And I remember when I first watched it, I thought that was odd. Like I thought that was kind of a weird choice for the music. What do you guys think?
The music, both of the movies are doing very, very subtle things to really emphasize how multicultural London is. And there's an interpretation of these movies, a lot of articles you can find online from British writers, where both this and Paddington 2 are kind of a commentary on what was going on in Britain at the time. Which this movie was made in 2014, which is right before the real campaigns for, you know, the Brexit referendum started, and it's very much a movie about you know, a refugee coming to England and finding a new home and adding to the cultural diversity of London itself and making everyone around him more accepting, more welcoming, and just better overall. And the first one is very much the fish out of water story of him coming to London and initially having a contrast with the people. And even Hugh Bonneville's character is kind of a little more conservative, doesn't really trust Paddington, but he builds that trust and eventually he changes his mind. It's very, you know, it's a very optimistic, wholesome message, but it's honestly actually quite smart considering when it was made and in the country in which it was made. And the second one too, when they show the neighborhood and Paddington going through the neighborhood, it's very culturally diverse.
Yeah, a lot more diverse than the first
one.
Yeah.
Very intentionally, I think. And And it's kind of showing the impact of Paddington adding to that diversity and making everyone happier, and how people can just kind of come together and be okay with each other. It's a simple message.
That's really smart.
It's a simple message, but it's also a very powerful one given the times.
Certainly well executed as well.
Yeah.
If only more people had taken the message to heart.
If only David Cameron would watch Paddington more often. Yeah.
But yeah, and that was interesting. Like that, the music is an example of that. I didn't think about that because I had noticed the efforts of the acceptance and all that. Obviously, that message is made very clear. But yeah, I didn't think about it in terms of the music is also showcasing the multiculturalism of the entire movie and all of London for that matter.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just a generally beautiful love letter to London itself, which is a city I love, and watching this movie, you see why. Like you can really tell why that city is special, and it kind of takes out all the stuff that can be negative about it, but it takes the best. It's kind of showing you what the best version of us could be, and it's just lovely.
Well, and if you know what you know about me as a movie watcher, that's the sort of stuff that really resonates with me. Is I love movies about good people and good things happening to good people, optimism, that all that stuff means so much to me that it's no wonder that both of these movies absolutely click for me.
Yeah. The second one in particular is A Love Letter to London, just because it is textually about going to different parts of the city, the different landmarks, and finding clues at them. It's kind of a national treasure kind of thing, but it does showcase the different landmarks in London.
For sure. And it's able to do all this stuff without ever feeling too naive, because it is still a children's film. So it's always framed in a way that doesn't feel, oh, this is a bit too much, too sappy. They're able to do it without feeling too sappy, which is very surprising for me, because often when they try to go too wholesome, it kind of feels a little bit much.
So let's go ahead and dive into Paddington 2, which is our film to remember for the week.
Yes.
Paddington 2 was released November 5th, 2015 in the United Kingdom, and January 12th, 2018 in the United States. As Josh mentioned earlier, not the best release window in the United States.
Yes.
Again, it was directed by Paul King. The budget on this one was even lower than the first one, $40 million. And resulted in a worldwide gross of $227 million, almost $228 million.
And an even worse split in terms of domestic versus international in terms of the United States, because the first one was 27% of its money came from the United States. Second one, 18% of its money came from the United States. So it only made $41 million domestically in the U.S.
And it's just so crazy to me because the critics absolutely loved both movies.
Yes.
And especially the second one.
We know that people don't always respond to what the critics are telling them, but you'd think that if enough critics are telling you these are great movies, that some parents would take their kids to see these movies.
Yeah. Well, again, January. I remember David Ehrlich, who's the critic for IndieWire, when the second one came out, he said that Paddington 2 is better than 5 of the 8 movies nominated for Best Picture, which are happening right now, because this comes out during Oscar season basically. But
yeah,
not many people want to go see it still.
The budget, as we said, was very, very low, but most of the main cast returned except for Nicole Kidman, who was replaced by Hugh Grant as the villain for Paddington 2. As well as a slew of new characters in the prison sequence for poor Paddington, including Brendan Gleeson, who we mentioned earlier. Another fun fact about Paddington 2, and I guess fun fact's probably the wrong word. The author of Paddington 2, the author of Paddington, Michael Bond, passed away on the last day of filming for this movie at the age of 91. The last Paddington book had been released in April of 2017, with the overall series having sold over 35 million copies. Which, considering how we talked about that this book series didn't gain as much relevance in the United States as it did in the United Kingdom, 35 million is still an insane number of books sold. So it's no wonder that Paddington is like an icon, like Hugo said.
Yeah.
There's statues of Paddington, not just in Paddington Station, but like all over London. They have there's Paddington statues.
He's honestly everywhere. And I'm sure the majority of those cells are probably in England and Britain overall, because in Italy people don't really know about Paddington. It's surprising.
I gotta find those Paddington statues, man. I was in London last year. I didn't visit any Paddington statues.
They might. I don't know if they're still up there. I know that leading up to the film, they had put out a whole bunch of Paddington statues with Paddington dressed in different garb, which I thought was pretty cool.
Well, there's got to be one at least in Paddington Station. I'm sure
there definitely is one in Paddington Station.
Yeah, which I guess I've not been to. So
the reason I wanted to mention Michael Bond passing away on the last day of filming is there's something sort of poetic about that this movie is one of the best of all time, certainly in the kids genre. One of the best of all time, Josh. I mean, like there's millions of movies made, right? So like it's in the top 1,000 probably for me.
Okay. Top 1,000, that's fine.
Although we will get into this here in just a moment, but
yeah, I just don't. You know, this movie is probably most talked about because of its 99%/100% Rotten Tomatoes. But I just want to caution as to what that actually means, and not say it's one of the best movies ever made because Rotten Tomatoes score. We'll get to that though. We'll get to that later. I just want to.
I'm obviously not the only person who thinks very highly of this movie because it is number 209 on the letterboxd top 250. So clearly a lot of people do actually like the movie. But I guess I didn't finish my thought. Michael Bond, there's just something sort of poetic about the author passing away on the last day of this movie being made, and this movie being kind of a culmination of, decades of Paddington, for Michael Bond, but also for all of the United Kingdom. I just thought there was something interesting about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so as we were alluding to earlier, Rotten Tomatoes, as of April 28th, 2021, a new review of Citizen Kane was added to Rotten Tomatoes, which brought its freshness rating down to 99%, making it no longer the highest scoring movie on Rotten Tomatoes.
And what we mean by that is it had 100% approval rating from critics, and it had the most number of critics, so therefore it had the most people contribute to its critic score and still had 100% approval. Right. That was what Citizen Kane's title.
The important thing with this Rotten Tomatoes news is to point out that people aren't saying that Paddington is a perfect 10 across the board, or Paddington 2, and they weren't saying Citizen Kane was necessarily a perfect 10 across the board. It was that all these critics approved of this movie. Yeah.
Gave it a
positive rating. And it dropped down. Citizen Kane dropped down to 99%, which allowed Paddington 2 to move up to take the top spot as the most approved, most rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes. So that's a big moment, obviously.
Yes.
But it
is also. It's since been unseated, though, right?
Yeah, you guys were telling me that. What was it unseated by?
Well, someone came in like 3 years after the fact. Well, first of all, let's just acknowledge this is stupid. Like, this is a dumb thing. The fact that someone came in and gave Citizen Kane like a negative review. Well, I guess they went and found a negative review of Citizen Kane from decades ago, and then added that to the site, which ruined its 100% approval rating, that's already dumb enough. And then Paddington 2. After it was, crowned, quote unquote, air quotes, sarcastic air quotes, crowned, the best movie on Rotten Tomatoes, someone came and wrote a 4 years later. Was it 4 years later, or was it a contemporaneous review? I don't remember. Regardless, it's a really, really dumb negative review. They basically complained that like the bear looks dirty and isn't the bear from the books, therefore it's a bad movie. Like that's dumb. So, but also like Grizz, to your point, like what does 100% Rotten Tomatoes really mean? Like, I mean, it's cool that it has like a wide approval rating. That's kind of the best way you can put it. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the most quality movie of all time.
I think what it indicates is it indicates a lower limit of quality. So
yeah, a high floor.
It's a high floor. So like I think it indicates that this is the sort of movie that the majority of people will enjoy, and like we said at the top, you will at least like this movie. because there's not enough bad to say about it to make you not like it.
Which is a really that's a good thing to know about a movie, that it has a wide approval rating. Like the something I can compare it to is Ted Lasso, the show on Apple TV Plus from last year. Like everyone I knew who watched that really, really liked it, and like a bunch of different people in my life who have very different tastes all were like singing its praises. So the fact that it has a very wide approval rating is something like that's good to know about the show. Like the odds are, if you watch it, you'll probably like it. Even if you don't love it, you'll probably like it at the very least. And I think you can say the same about a movie with a high Rotten Tomatoes percentage, like Paddington 2, for example.
But it is, like Josh says, a dangerous quote unquote thing for the movie industry as a whole, because a lot of people, like even myself, sometimes I fall into this category. I look at a Rotten Tomato score as an indicator of how good the movie is, and
well, me too.
Yeah, which is not what, obviously that's not what Rotten Tomatoes is trying to tell you, but it's hard not to fall into that sometimes. And then you end up with silly arguments like, is Paddington 2 the greatest movie of all time?
And the answer is yes, obviously.
Obviously, it is. But, I mean, 100%.
I think it's an indication of this movie being just so lovely that there's something completely ubiquitous about it, that it's very difficult to say something bad about it. That you can have small criticism, but overall, I find it very hard to imagine somebody who likes film, which I suppose should be the majority of people who actually review movies professionally. Are people
certainly everyone on
like
this
cinema.
Podcast.
I can't imagine somebody who really likes cinema watching this and saying, "Oh no, this is a bad movie." It's tough, and because the fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes means at least a 6 out of 10 or higher, it's very hard for me to imagine anybody giving it a lower score than that. But it does certainly say something about the movie and how, as I said, ubiquitous it is.
Yeah, Grizz, you've later in the outline whether or not you think, do critics like this movie more than audiences? Because like it has a near perfect critic approval rating, but like it's not in the IMDb top 250, for example. I think it has like a 7.8 on IMDb, which is like really good, but not like among the best ever.
Just to put it in perspective, most of the top 250 are like 8.1 and higher.
Mm-hmm.
For IMDb.
So it's kind of on the cusp, but not quite. And so you ask if critics like this more than audiences. I kind of am not sure that they do. I think that like if you break down the IMDb ratings, like if you look at like what percentage of people gave it a 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10, that's a 96%. So while it only averages to a 7.8, that's because it gets a lot of 7s and a lot of 8s. But like if you look at like who's approving, so if you use the same like tomato meter like math, like who's giving this movie a 6 out of 10 or higher, 96% of IMDb users are giving it a 6 out of 10 or higher.
General audience does like the movie as much as the critics do.
Yeah, maybe a little less. Like I said, like on Rotten Tomatoes, like yes, it has a 99% approval, but like if you go by like the actual scores that the critics are giving it, it averages an 8.7 out of 10. And if you average the scores that audiences are giving, it's an 8.4 out of 10. So 8.7 versus 8.4, that's like close.
So not a huge difference. But the reason I put that question in there was because we were talking about how poor the box office was, and for the United States. And so I was wondering if does it really just amount to that they didn't sell enough Paddington 2 books when we were kids? Is that what it boils down to?
I mean, probably. It also, I'd never heard of Paddington before the movie came out, so that's one thing. And like, I didn't like, by the time Paddington 2 came out, I hadn't like, gotten hip to the Paddington craze that I should have gotten.
You're on board now.
But also, I am on board now. But also, they put it out in January when no one's going to the movies, and also like, the first one came out in 2015, second came out in 2018. Movie theaters were kind of already starting to go downhill by 2018, even from compared to 2015.
Yeah,
and
for
sure. unless you're seeing an Avenger, you're not going to the movies as often. So that could also be part of it. Maybe I'm putting too much stock in that, but that might be why the second one made less.
It's also one of those movies that kind of gains its following gradually, just because it was. I think this movie is beloved among film people more than it is among just the audience in general. Because like, it was kind of a sensation when it came out. Oh, this movie about the CGI bear is getting 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. The critics are loving this, and all of film Twitter is watching this movie, and like the movie has a 4.2 rating on letterboxd. And if you know anything about letterboxd,
That's really good.
any rating above a 4 is really impressive, because there's a lot of snobs on letterboxd who give very good movies low scores. Like, it's very hard for a movie to get that kind of score. So there's just something about it. I don't know. Well, I mean, it's excellent.
Let's talk about it. So now we're going to go into the plot a little bit here for Paddington 2. We'll do the setup, which is not spoilery, and then we'll talk about some spoilery stuff. So the general plot: Paddington has lived with the Browns now for a few years and still writes to his Aunt Lucy often. It is almost Aunt Lucy's 100th birthday. Josh, do you already have something to add?
Cold open. We have a cold open in this.
We do have a cold open.
Yes. Can we mention that very briefly?
Go ahead.
We open in Peru, the darkest Peru, I guess is what the term is, which is where the first, 5 or 10 minutes of the first movie takes place. And we see Aunt Lucy and Uncle Pastuzo, who passed away in the opening of the first movie. And we see them planning a trip to London, a trip they've been planning their entire life, and they're very excited. But then they come across a young bear in a river who's about to go down a waterfall, and they rescue him. And that turns out to be Paddington. And because they now have a young bear cub to take care of, they can no longer go to London, which is a nice... I like this for a number of reasons. Number one, it sets up why Aunt Lucy's always wanted to go to London and loves London, but also couldn't because of Paddington. But also, I like that this, shows us a cute little young Paddington cub that's, cuter than the regular Paddington even. So
it doesn't speak English yet.
Yes. I just think this is a really, really effective opening, both to introduce the character and also thematically, because that's kind of like the stakes of the movie for moving forward is Aunt Lucy in London.
And so, so immediately following that, we're in London, and it's almost Aunt Lucy's 100th birthday, so Paddington has set out to find her the perfect gift, and he goes to Mr. Gruber's antique shop, and Mr. Gruber shows him a delightful little pop-up book showing all the sights of London. And of course, since Aunt Lucy has been already shown to have always wanted to go to London, this is the perfect gift for Paddington to get her, because in the first movie, she has the opportunity to go with Paddington, but she's too old, she's not going to make it, so she makes the choice to send Paddington on his own. And so,
he thinks if she can't see London, the pop-up book will be the next best thing. So basically and there's a really lovely sequence where it shows Aunt Lucy and Paddington in London, but they're in a pop-up book version of London. Yeah, I think it's a really, really good. It's a great sequence.
And that's another one where I'm like, okay, we talked about the CG budget. This is a really good, that whole sequence is has got to be done in CG, right?
All of it had to do, but yeah.
I wasn't sure if maybe they just made a giant pop-up book and filmed that as the set, and then they added the CG bears.
But
I don't think so.
If they made all of Piccadilly Circus in a pop-up book, I would just think they probably did that on the computer.
Yeah. So I think it was probably all CG, but so again, impressive CG work in this movie.
It's not just that. There are several moments in the movie where they do little, a few seconds of animation, and it's always so clever and always so cool to see them play with style. The movie doesn't stick to realism at all. They're really going for different stylistic choices, and it makes it interesting visually throughout.
But the important note about this book is that it is tied to Madame Koslova's steam fair, which is in one of the scenes that comes up. The family goes with Paddington to the steam fair, and while there, they go to the grand opening of the fair, where one of their neighbors, the famous actor Phoenix Buchanan, as played by Hugh Grant, is on stage for this grand opening, and he's... Go ahead, Josh.
He was a famous actor, but now he only does dog food commercials.
Yes.
Which is just a great bit.
Which is really funny, because they even show one of the commercials.
Yes.
And it's that is a very good moment.
Not to be eaten by humans.
Yes. It's so funny. And Hugh Grant is honestly the perfect British actor to put in that sort of role. Do you agree with that? He's having more fun
in this than Nicole Kidman was having in the first one, and Nicole Kidman was having a blast in the first one.
Yes.
Just both Nicole Kidman and Hugh Grant, their performances are major highlights of both movies, particularly Hugh Grant though in this.
He's just amazing.
He's on the stage, and he, as we talked about earlier, he wants a volunteer from the audience to come up and help him open the fair, and so he does his eeny, meeny, miny, bear, and selects Paddington to come on stage, and he asks Paddington what his dreams are, because this is the place where dreams come true.
If he had a wish or something like that, like, what's your wish? Yeah.
And his wish is to find the perfect gift is to get Aunt Lucy the perfect gift, and he tells him it's this pop-up book, and I'm trying to earn the money to buy it for her. And when Hugh Grant hears about this pop-up book, it immediately is like, "Oh, really?
Tell me more about this book.
Tell me about
where
this
is
book."
it? Yeah.
And so, of course, setting up that this pop-up book is more than meets the eye.
It's a nice MacGuffin.
It's a perfect MacGuffin. But shortly thereafter, Paddington has gone to work, and is he's become a window cleaner,
washer,
which is an adorable montage sequence with him.
First he tries to be a barber assistant in Giovanni's
yes,
and messes it up royally. So he ends up being a window cleaner.
Which, real quick, like, both those scenes are like hijinks scenes,
Yeah.
him at the barber and him doing window cleaning, but they also both factor importantly into the story and in the narrative, because the guy whose hair he messes up at the barbershop comes back later in a way that we'll talk about in a second. And, like, the window cleaning sequence, like, that gives us an extra opportunity to meet everyone in this neighborhood one more time, because that's going to be important later, because otherwise we'll only meet them, like, on Paddington's, like, morning commute, basically. But, like, seeing them, having an extra story beat with them, like, I think matters. And, like, so both the hijink scenes, I think, matter to the narrative overall, which is very smart.
And also they set up some of the hair cutting thing. Paddington buzzes the hair off of a customer, and it turns out this guy is going to be a judge for Paddington later. But I also just love that the judge keeps coming back later in the movie.
Oh yeah.
And
even after the trial.
Not even in, like, important ways, but, like, they just keep bringing him back, and there's just really funny, humorous moments with him and his wife in particular. But yeah,
right,
so
Gertrude.
After work, he comes home, and he's passing by Mr. Gruber's shop when he witnesses someone attempting to break into the shop. So, of course, he tries to stop him, because that's what Paddington does. And the criminal leads him on a merry chase through the neighborhood, with Paddington riding on the back of an Irish wolfhound.
and being carried by a goose.
And being carried by a goose for a little while. But after the chase, Paddington catches up to him, but then the thief throws a smoke bomb and disappears just before the police show up and arrest Paddington for the burglary. And so this is where, like, this sets up the actual plot of the movie.
You're breaking to Act 2, yes. So he's put on trial and everything, and so I was watching this with my wife, and her one critique of the movie was that there was not nearly enough evidence to convict Paddington of this burglary, so she thought that was, like, a major plot hole.
I agree with her.
They also give him 10 years for stealing this little book.
Yeah.
And 10 years for grand larceny and barbarly harm.
Because the judge
the
in his case was the guy whose head he accidentally shaved. Which is, I mean, that's, like, I think the explanation of how they convicted him is because, well, that's the thing is, like, he was charged with stealing this book, but he didn't have the book on him.
No, but they did see him.
They saw him on the security camera.
Yes. Well, and they chased him. The police were chasing him as well. So they saw him he was in Mr. Gruber's shop. So, like, they did witness him having...
And his paws were everywhere. There's marmalade inside the shop.
Which everywhere.
Happened to be the same marmalade that he was carrying with him, so...
Yeah, and during the trial, you get this cameo from Richard Ayoade that you might know from the IT Crowd. He's also director. He directed a movie called Submarine, really good. Indie drama.
Oh, yeah.
Indie drama, comedy, coming-of-age movie, really good.
I didn't know he directed that, but that's a good movie.
Yeah, and... his scene is so funny, where he's giving out the evidence, and he's like, we found the paw prints over here, and here, and then the marmalade was here. And he goes all over the shop because it was everywhere. It's so cute.
It's adorable. But yeah, so let's take this moment to go give our general thoughts before we go into what could be called spoilers for the rest of the movie. Just real quick, I know we've been raving about it already. what are your thoughts? Well, basically, did you like Paddington 2 even better than Paddington 1?
Yes, I did. First of all, I think that we kind of mentioned that Nicole Kidman's arc is like the weaker part of the first one. Feels a little tacked on, and like just based on the plot summary you've given so far, Grizz, like you can tell that the villain is more integrated into the overall narrative in the second one. Like, you know, he's kind of the villain's like the part of the inciting incident more or less, and like the thrust of the story, and like so that helps. Also, like as I mentioned, like all the hijinks stuff like comes back. There's an awful lot of setup and payoff in this one, like more so than the first one. Hugo, you mentioned that like both movies open with Paddington writing a letter to Aunt Lucy and like kind of describing what each of the characters are up to, and like that, including in this movie, in the second one, and like every single thing that he mentions in that opening letter to Lucy like comes back and pays off in some way in the third act, which I think is very satisfying. And also, this is a little bit of a sillier point, but the fact that it's not an origin story kind of lets it be a bigger story. And like again, a silly comparison, but like Batman Begins versus The Dark Knight. Like Batman Begins, half of that movie has to be like setting up how Bruce Wayne becomes Batman, and like The Dark Knight doesn't have to do that. So like it can basically just be like a Michael Mann movie that happens to have Batman in it.
Yeah.
And Paddington 2 is kind of the same way. Like the Paddington 1, most of the narrative is like Paddington coming to London and fish out of water and being integrated in the family. But the second one doesn't have to do that, so like it can just be like a story about a wrongful conviction and a search to exonerate this guy and a jailbreak, which is really fun. And so yeah, Paddington 2. I mean, I love them both, but I think Paddington 2 is definitely better.
Hugo, how do you feel?
Okay, there's something about the first one that I like more in the sense just of the introduction of these characters and just how heartwarming they are, and just the little arc of the family fully accepting him into their family and him becoming part of it is so well done. But overall, I do think the second one is better in almost every other way, because especially with the villain, he's not only part of the inciting incident and part of the plot specifically, but what he's trying to do is an integral part of the emotional stakes of the movie as well. Because the emotional stake of the movie is Paddington wants to get Aunt Lucy to experience London, and this mustache twirling villain who's this forgotten actor does something that prevents Paddington from getting what he wants for Aunt Lucy. So it very well integrated in that sense. And everything that was true about the first movie is true about the second one. It looks just visually beautiful. It's even more creative. It's even more well crafted in terms of editing and how it does some of the action sequences. It's just everything about it is the same but better. It's more creative, more interesting, more beautiful, and it's to me it's one of those movies that you're like, oh, what are the best sequels of all time? You're like, oh, Godfather 2, Paddington 2, The Dark Knight, Empire Strikes Back. It kind of
you can throw it in that category, yeah.
Yeah.
I like it better, and the first time through, I should say on my rewatch of Paddington, I liked it better the second time. I loved it the first time, but I liked it even better the second time watching it.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
But I still think that overall Paddington 2 is slightly better than Paddington 1. And it really, for me, just comes down to what we've already said, that the integration of the villain into the actual story is much better done. And
feels more cohesive.
Yeah, and so the whole movie is better start to finish because of it. Okay, well, so we've already talked about the British sensibilities in these movies, so I'm going to skip that question. But I did want to talk about, what about these movies, and particularly Paddington 2, makes it so that it's easier for all audiences to appreciate and not just be a kid's movie.
I think we kind of got into that with the first one. It's just so well done and so visually interesting that even if you're like a jaded adult and you don't care about this plot about the cute bear, it's still a fun movie to watch just because of how well structured and well directed it is. And again, the very smart pop culture references that you'll get, like the Modern Times joke is so good.
Explain the Modern Times joke.
When they're escaping from prison, spoilers, he goes through the gears. Isn't that Modern Times? Or is that...
Yes. Oh, no.
I don't know. I haven't seen Modern Times.
Oh, you haven't seen it. Okay. Modern Times.
Or is it City Lights?
It might be City of Lights.
Regardless, it's a Chaplin
sure.
reference.
I've
It's a
watched it
Chaplin
recently. It's a
film.
Chaplin movie.
It's the scene where he goes through the gears up the clock, and he comes out, and he has a little mustache because he's, I don't know, from
Oh, yeah.
and he kind of shoves it away, and that's a Chaplin references, and like if you know that, you'll get it, but if you don't, it's kind of a funny scene anyway. And the film is consistently that good at being good on several different levels. Like you can watch it as just studying how the film is made from a film standpoint, or you can follow the cute story of the bear, and it's equally as good on both fronts. So I think that's where it really succeeds.
Well, so let's go ahead and get into the spoilers section now. We don't necessarily have to do it in any particular order. I just wanted to, we're going to talk about things that happen throughout the rest of the movie, and you kind of jump back and forth between some scenes. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was all the prison stuff that Hugo just mentioned. How adorable is Paddington Bear in a prison jumpsuit? Is that not the cutest thing?
Well, if it wasn't immediately cute, it becomes cute pretty soon because Paddington is assigned to do laundry duty at the prison, and he accidentally puts a red sock in with all the white and gray prison uniforms, and they become pink. And so then it becomes really cute immediately.
It's so cute.
All this prison stuff, it's a nod to Grand Budapest Hotel, right? Like I'm not seeing it. Is it? It's not just me.
I connect that dot. I mean, I don't know when this went to production. I mean, this went to production after Grand Budapest came out, but like, there's a. I mean, it's very pink. Grand Budapest Hotel is very pink movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's got to be part of it. But
the flowers that they bring in later.
Yeah, and even like
also
the fact that
we talked about the dollhouse, like when the prison opens up and you see the inside, obviously. So yeah, I mean, I can see it, Hugo.
And there's also the fact that he's the character. He's innocent, and he's also kind of a fish out of water in the prison because these are all like kind of hardened criminal type guys, but at the same
like
time,
Gustav H.
They also have a kind of a very sweet side to them that he's able to bring out, and then they involve him into the escape later.
The hardened criminals help him escape, which is exactly what happens in Grand Budapest.
Well, and what I really liked with the prison stuff was, he's like we've talked about, he's taken away from his family in the Browns, and the Browns come to visit. And I just love the moment where the Browns come to visit, and Paddington wants to introduce them to all his new friends. And they introduce one at a time with people's faces poking in from all over.
Pop into the frame.
They pop into the frame.
And they all have the funniest
wonderful
names.
They have great names.
Well.
And they have a British politician in there who... I hope I can count on you for your vote.
This.
And I think probably the most indelible image from Paddington 2 is that shot of Paddington behind the glass with Brendan Gleeson and like the 15 other prisoners there with them, which is just a great image. My favorite bit of this prison sequence is just Brendan Gleeson's performance and his character.
As Knuckles McGillicuddy or something like that. Knuckles McGinty.
He's the chef at the prison that everyone is terrified of, but Paddington wins over pretty quickly
with marmalade.
A little marmalade.
Yes. I can't believe we haven't talked about marmalade yet. Well, it's kind of a huge part of these movies.
Because we're getting to the prison stuff, and like we have to talk about it in this prison stuff for sure.
I mean, marmalade's big in Paddington 1 also, though, but it's also big in this prison scene in Paddington 2. Yeah.
I just think, I love that Knuckles eats a little bit of the marmalade and then immediately, decides like, okay, this bear is under my protection.
And also the moment
I love that so much.
Where Paddington kind of shoves the marmalade sandwich in Brendan Gleeson's mouth, and
by accident,
and he goes from being really angry to just looking straight into the camera, and you can hear the music going, oh, and
like the chorus of angels,
a revelation because of the marmalade, and he's like, "You can make this."
So then they set out to make it, and Paddington has to win over Brendan Gleeson to get him involved in the marmalade making process. And this is a great moment just in general. If you're a fan of cooking, this is one of those things that people always talk about with cooking, is that it brings people together. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happens in this prison, is they start off with just Paddington and Knuckles, And then they goes like, well, does anybody else have any recipes? And so then they start making all sorts of cakes and pastries and stuff.
And then the prison becomes suddenly a really nice place to live. They start putting flower pots everywhere, and the guard starts reading them bedtime stories over the PA at night.
I'll tell you, like, if I knew that this prison was out there, I'd commit crimes.
Fewer for-profit prisons in the United States and more Paddington prisons in the United States.
Yes,
prisons.
That's what I say.
Yeah, and it's kind of doubling down on this idea that Paddington, like, the whole thesis of these movies is kindness, as Aunt Lucy says, kindness will kind of save the world, and will.
Yeah, what's the quote? If everyone is nice and
if
polite.
we're kind and polite, the world will be right.
Exactly.
Correct.
So it's basically kindness will save the world is what the movie is saying. And it's portrayed with Paddington where wherever he goes, the place instantly becomes more colourful, but more vibrant. Yeah. The people are kinder to each other.
Whether it's the neighborhood in Windsor Gardens where the Browns live, or if it's this prison, etc. Yeah, very good point.
So it kind of continues with that through line. It's so cute. And it just so happens that so many of these convicts are really good pastry chefs. Which is hilarious.
Which also, like, kind of also reminds me of Grand Budapest, because, like, there's a pastry shop.
Because the pastry thing is a big part of it.
Cakes, yeah.
I'm loving how much, like, every time we say this, I'm like, oh yeah, that does remind me of Grand Budapest Hotel.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so, do you have anything else you wanted to add on the prisons, or can I move on to Hugh Grant's criminal escapades?
Prison that seems pretty easy to break out of, all things considered.
Yes. Very easy to break out of.
I didn't know much about Paddington 2 before I watched it, but I knew that there was probably going to be a prison break sequence, and, like, I was very looking forward to it. And, like, it's nice. It's a nice sequence, but it's also, like, kind of easy. Kind of easy to do. There wasn't much to the breakout.
Yeah, they made a hot air balloon with laundry.
Well, also, like, apparently every cell in the prison is a trap door that you can just, like, open and crawl out of your cell. So that's really convenient for breakouts.
Also makes me think, like, why didn't they tell the rest of the prisoners about these trap doors?
Just 4 of them. Yeah.
But yeah, so Hugh Grant's criminal escapades. This is one of the highlights of the movie for me, because Hugh Grant, his whole thing, or Phoenix Buchanan's whole thing, is that he is sort of having a multiple personality thing. I don't know if it's...
He's an actor, and he's, like, acting as the characters that he plays, basically, and, like, having conversations with himself in different voices, which, could be, like, a dissociative episode, possibly.
No, I think that is... what they say is he's become so full of himself that he will not accept working with anyone else. So all of the characters have to be him. And so he's portraying all these... Like, he's portraying these different characters that he uses to go on the escapades and kind of... find the little clues in every because the pop-up book has clues that you're supposed to find in every one of the landmarks that are shown on the pop-up book.
Yeah, explain his scheme. Explain his scheme real quick.
Yeah, so the pop-up book, he has a letter that you will find in each of the landmarks that are shown in the book, and through that, then you will use that kind of the code that you find, and at the end, he's supposed to go back to Madam
Kozlov's. Kozlov's.
Madame Kozlov. Whoever put on the fair.
For some reason, I was going to say Madame Pavlova, which, whatever. Madame Kozlov's fair, where he'll kind of touch, an organ of some kind?
She has a hidden treasure. Madame Kozlov has a hidden treasure, and, like, her pop-up book is a treasure map to give you clues to find her treasure.
To basically where he wants to fund his one-man show that he thinks will be his big return to the scene, because he hasn't really been acting a lot. He's been doing dog food commercials and stuff because nobody wants to work with him, and he doesn't want to work with anyone. So each of the characters he kind of uses to go depending on the setting and depending on which of the landmark he has to rob to kind of burgle his way into it.
Like, he hides as the first crime. He's just a grummy burglar character, and then he's a nun, and then
at St. Paul's Cathedral he's a nun. Yeah.
Then he's in a suit of armor.
At Tower Bridge.
Yes, at Tower Bridge. And I just love it all because it's really fun watching Hugh Grant jumping back and forth between the different voices and the different personalities for the characters that he's playing when he's having these conversations with himself. And also, it's, again, just a very hijinky, funny thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
Absolutely. Hugh Grant earlier this year was in The Undoing, also starring Paddington villain Nicole Kidman on HBO, and I said that him in The Undoing was his best performance that I've seen him do. Paddington 2 might actually be his best performance that I've seen him do, quite possibly.
It's so much fun. But yeah, so I like a good heist movie in general, and so with Paddington 2, not only are we having the prison escape that Paddington has, but we also have Hugh Grant's heist as Phoenix Buchanan.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Paddington is living the Grand Budapest storyline, and Phoenix Buchanan is living the National Treasure storyline.
Yes.
It's all rolled into one movie. Yeah,
It's
great
so
stuff.
Good.
What more could you ask for?
But yeah, so we already talked about Paddington's escape being very easy. We needed to talk about the Browns' investigation. I honestly, this is probably the weakest part of the movie for me. I still like it, but I think they don't give them enough to do.
Well, I mean, they cracked the case.
I mean, yeah, they do. But it's almost accidental that they crack the case.
Yes. I mean, to explain what you mean is, like, as Paddington's in prison, like, the Brown family works to investigate the actual theft at Gruber's shop to find out who actually did it so they can clear Paddington's name. And, I mean, it's hijinksy also. Like, my favorite sequence in this is when Sally Hawkins and Hugh Bonneville go into Phoenix Buchanan's house because they, like, somehow suspect him. I can't remember how.
Because of the parrot.
Yes, the parrot says, "He's behind you." And
it's in
Phoenix
reference Buchanan behind her.
Phoenix Buchanan.
Right, and then Sally Hawkins talks to Hugh Grant, and he says, "Oh yeah, that he mentions that the burglar has blue eyes, even though all the wanted posters were just drawn in pencil without color." So that makes her realize,
and
he knows
she drew them herself, if I'm not wrong. And
correct.
She did.
It's a really cool scene because when he says the blue eyes thing, she looks at his face, and in the movie, we see all the drawings being juxtaposed to his face.
Cycle over his face, yeah.
It's
with
a really
his
cool
striking
visual
blue
thing.
eyes.
Yes, it's a really cool visual thing that makes us understand that she's getting that it's him.
Right. But then Sally Hawkins and Hugh Bonneville go into Phoenix Buchanan's house and, like, snoop around, and, like, then he comes back and, like, finds them, which I thought this was really funny.
Because Hugh Bonneville's in his bathrobe because he wasn't planning on going over there. He came over to stop his wife.
And he's claiming to do an inspection because his insurance company, like, insures Phoenix Buchanan's house. And it's just, it's really funny. And then Phoenix Buchanan pulls the curtain back, and Sally Hawkins is there pretending to inspect the window.
Oh, yeah, this seems very secure, very secure. It was very funny.
Good stuff.
But yeah.
You're probably right, though. That might be the weakest part, though. But, like, that's a relative term.
Yeah,
I still like it a lot.
Like, as far as weakness, like, it's not really a weakness. It's just the weakest thing in the movie. But I also love that they do a little bit with the kids where, they're going through normal progressions that children go through, where Lucy, is that no, Lucy's the aunt. What's the daughter's name? The daughter of the Brown family has broken up with her boyfriend and it has decided to start a newspaper where no boys are allowed to work.
Judy.
Yes.
Judy, thank you.
Judy.
And then J-Dog is at the stage where you have a silly nickname and you dress funny and pretend to not like things that you actually like because they're not cool.
Pretend to be something that you're not, yeah.
And of course, both of these things end up playing into the plot of the movie a lot as well. So actually, I think the kids end up having the biggest impact, on like
much
the
more than
actual
the previous
events
movie,
than they did in the previous movie. But they had less of a narrative role. Like that, like they didn't have as many lines in this movie as they did in the previous one. And I think it's probably because at this point they already love Paddington, so like they can't really set up another conflict.
The first movie, them kind of taking him into their family is the emotional core of the movie. And
right.
Here it's not. Here it's him being part of the family yet, but also remembering where he came from and the family that he left behind to get here.
But also part of the community too, like part of the larger Windsor Gardens community. Yeah.
And so then this, because I want to talk about Jonathan in this moment, but his big moment comes as a part of the big train showdown with Phoenix Buchanan and Paddington. Paddington is on the train trying to get the pop-up book from Phoenix Buchanan. Phoenix Buchanan is on this train
in pursuit,
trying to get the treasure, and the Brown family are on a separate train trying to catch up so that they can save Paddington. because of course he
steam
has
trains,
escaped
by the
from
way.
prison. And these are steam trains, and this is important because Jonathan is set up earlier in the movie to secretly love steam trains, and he doesn't want anyone to know how much he loves steam trains. And I just love the moment in the movie because it's super cheesy, but he's like, "I'm Jonathan Brown, and I love steam trains." Like,
Great payoff.
Weird little,
Wonderful payoff.
weird little moment. I love it though. But this again is, who doesn't love a good train sequence, right?
This is like very Speed to me. Like I see a lot of. I mean, maybe it's just incidental, but the fact they like fight on top of the train, and like there's a sequence where like Hugh Bonneville's like caught between the two trains, and he's like doing the splits. Like I don't know. A lot of speed. I love speed. So yeah, this
in
sequence
so many
rules.
action movies, there's these train fights.
Yeah.
There's something people love fighting on top of trains.
Like for me, because the movie before had the kind of Mission Impossible spoof of the Burj Khalifa sequence in Mission Impossible 4, I instantly thought of Mission Impossible, the first one, because there's the scene of Paddington kind of crawling through the train that is very much the same. But also here is where we get the Spider-Man 2 gag. Because you remember the train sequence in Spider-Man 2 where he's fighting against Doc Ock and he's sticking to the train, but then he sees the tunnel come and Doc Ock kind of dodges it and he just goes behind him.
There's a Matrix bend.
Yeah, there's a Matrix bend. And they do the exact same shot with Paddington, but Paddington is sticking to the train with
candied apples.
Candied apples. It's just so clever.
I love it so much. But yeah,
candied apples, which had been set up earlier in the movie, and now are brought back as a payoff. Yes, because everything is a payoff in this movie.
Yeah, there's so much setup and payoff. Like everything that you see has a reason for being there.
It's been planted at some point. Yeah.
But yeah, so Phoenix Buchanan finds the treasure, and then immediately Spider-Man Paddington is hanging down from the roof of the train, and uses his candied apple to steal the book. And then, of course, now Phoenix Buchanan accidentally hits the a button, and it causes the treasure to close back up. So he needs the book again, and that's what leads them on this merry chase through there. And of course, we get the payoff of his friends who had escaped from the prison with him coming back to save him. What do you got, Josh?
Well, before that, the train that Paddington is on goes off the rails, falls into the river, and then Mrs. Brown, Sally Hawkins, who'd been training to swim the English Channel, now has to dive in. So it pays off her character thing because she's able to dive in and hold her breath for an inordinate amount of time to go down and try to save Paddington from drowning. And then his friends
perfect dive from like 25 meters or whatever. Like it's nothing.
And of course, I saw this and immediately go, "Oh, Shape of Water."
I love the same thing actually. Yeah. But then his friends who escaped from prison with him, who were trying to flee the country and did not want to come back to England because they'd get caught, they come back to England
and they
to
save
rescue Paddington.
And they save him because Sally Hawkins needed more help to get him out from the train.
And then in the credit sequence, we see that they get pardoned.
They get pardoned.
They release.
They get pardoned. Yes.
They're good guys now, or whatever the judge says. But yeah, so that's the end of the movie. Is they save Paddington? I guess actually, there's one more great moment at the end. Paddington,
that I cry a lot
has slept for 3 days, and after being saved from the train, and they wake up and it's Aunt Lucy's birthday, and Paddington
and the entire neighborhood's there in a very like this It's a Wonderful Life kind of ending where like everyone he knows, everyone we've met is there, like and happy that he's there.
And Paddington doesn't have the book. And so he feels so sad because he's missed Aunt Lucy's birthday. He can't get her the present in time. But Paddington's new family has come through for him, and they have went and got Aunt Lucy out of the Bear retirement home and brought her to London. And the movie just ends on a adorable little heartfelt hug between Paddington and Aunt Lucy. And I honestly, like, the stuff in the...
I'm going to start crying now thinking about it.
It's just a perfect ending. Wild. They don't dwell on it. They don't tell you, like, they're not going to do anything more after that any real import.
Yeah, they wrap up some loose ends during the credit sequence, basically, but they like, you're exactly right. They end perfectly on Paddington hugging Aunt Lucy and saying, "Happy birthday, Aunt Lucy." And again, I want to cry right now thinking about it. It's so good. It's so good.
It's really a testament to just how great these movies are, that you can end the movie with two CGI bears hugging, and it's the most emotionally I don't know, satisfying thing you've ever seen, and it'll make you cry. And it's not like, you can be as jaded as you want, but this is affecting. Like, it's so good.
And that's, I think, why it has such a high approval rating, even if it doesn't have like a perfect 10 score. Like, you leave the theater in a great mood. Like, it leaves you laughing and leaves you feeling good. You're dancing out of the theater, basically. And like, so like, obviously you're gonna write a positive review. Who's gonna see this ending and then go home and write a negative review?
You can't
Apparently
do it.
Only one jerk of a person.
And that's some Citizen Kane apologist.
Yeah.
Like they're Citizen Kane apologists. I mean, it's a joke.
Yeah.
You don't have to apologize for Citizen Kane. But
and then the credit sequence.
Yes, and the credits were really funny. Like we said, you find out about the prisoners have been pardoned, and you find out that Sally Hawkins swam across the English Channel but had forgot her passport, so she had to swim back.
Love that so much.
And we find out that the kids are doing fine. It's just a great little sequence during the credits.
Yeah, it's good. Time up all the bows. Yeah,
perfect.
And then how's the credit sequence end though?
Go ahead, Josh.
Hugh Grant in prison.
Oh my God,
Hugh Grant in prison,
of course.
In the same prison that Paddington was in, and he, after being there for 6 months, puts on this delightful, elaborate musical number, including himself, all the guards, all the other prisoners, and it's one of the more delightful parts of the movie. It's just the end credit sequence of Hugh Grant having a blast, singing and dancing.
God, this prison is the best.
It's like the level of meta comedy in this also is fantastic, because it's like just Hugh Grant, known for the romantic comedies, and he's done some drama, and like you get him, who is such a recognizable actor, especially in Britain, and you put it in this like bright pink outfit to do this musical number inside of a prison, and I don't know, there's something, and the guards are dancing in the number as well. It's just perfect.
And I love that, like, throughout the movie, he's again an actor trying to break back in. He keeps referring to getting back to the West End, the theater scene in the West End. And then in this sequence, he says, "I didn't ever really need the West End. I just needed a captive audience."
Great pun! What a perfect pun to end the movie on.
Wonderful stuff.
Well, so let's go ahead and do our ranking in our Film to Remembers. This will be movie number 29, so we will have one more movie next week in our rankings, and then we're getting to our big re-ranking episode where we develop a new system of ranking that Josh hates less. But anyways, our top 10 for now is number 10, Your Name. Number 9, The Thing. Number 8, Bicycle Thieves. Number 7, Chinatown. Number 6, Lawrence of Arabia. Number 5, Network. Number 4, Boogie Nights. Number 3, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. 2, Citizen Kane. And number 1, The Silence of the Lambs.
It's incredibly difficult for me.
I have no idea what to do with this. It's
very hard. It's very hard. Because,
like we've always talked about, is this a movie that we would watch, we want to watch again all the time? Or is it the best movie? Like when we're talking about our rankings here.
That will be the discussion before we do the actual re-rank.
Right.
Like, that'll be, are we ranking completely on personal preference, or are we giving recommendations?
And
Grizz, what are you thinking here, Grizz?
On both accounts,
I don't know what to do here.
On both accounts, I not only recommend this movie, but I adore this movie.
Same.
So for me, I would probably put it at, it'd be number 4 for me.
Number 4, so ahead of
Boogie
Nights, behind Ferris Bueller.
Yes.
It's tough, man.
I really don't know what to do, man. Like this could
my,
go.
My instinct is to say number 2, but
Well, okay, so that's good, because like I'm like kind of debating. Honestly, this could go anywhere from like number 5 down to like number 12, and I'd be satisfied with any of those rankings. So. Sounds like I'm lower than both of you, so like that means my vote kind of doesn't matter anymore. So you guys can discuss it.
Which is why Josh hates the current ranking system.
I mean, that's fine with me. Like, if you guys want to put this in like 2 or 3 or 4, that's totally fine. So like but you guys get to figure it out. I don't have to have an opinion, which is nice.
It's your vote, Grizz.
So then it goes in at number 4.
Yes.
Which now makes our top 10. Oh, I guess.
So we have officially confirmed our bias towards Citizen Kane. We are shills.
We are
And
For now.
We are film.
we do not
film
like
snobs.
joy. We are not
We'll
into
see what
joy.
the re-rank says.
Yeah, we'll see what the re-rank
We'll see what the re-rank says.
We will. Yeah, we will.
But now
We'll
our top
discuss
10.
how to rank those, by the way.
We will. We have to.
Yeah.
Number 10, The Thing. Number 9, Bicycle Thieves. Number 8, Chinatown. Number 7, Lawrence of Arabia. 6, Network. 5, Boogie Nights. Number 4, Paddington 2. Number 3, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. 2, Citizen Kane. And number 1, The Silence of the Lambs. I just want to shout out The Thing. That was the second movie we watched. Or no, that was our first.
That was the first.
That was our
movie we
first
watched.
film
Yeah.
to remember.
Yeah.
Still in the top 10.
Yeah.
Good for you, The Thing.
Good movie.
Yeah,
Very
hang
good
in
movie.
there.
So, what are we doing next week, gang?
Next week, I will be back in my hometown, St. Louis, Missouri, and also back in my hometown will be my brother. And so he will join us as a guest on the podcast, and we're going to be watching something that he and I watched an awful lot as kids, and that is Batman: Mask of the Phantasm, which I believe is the only theatrically released animated Batman movie.
Unless you count the Lego Batman movie, yeah.
And there's actually
Yeah.
there's been a bunch that have been released in theaters.
It was the first one then.
Yes, it was the first one. And
was the
there's
first
been a
one.
bunch that were released in theaters, but they're like very limited releases, like Fathom events type of things. So but yeah, very much looking forward to
Batman:
this.
Mask of the Phantasm. Yeah, oft forgotten, I think, overlooked, but like really beloved, and honestly an excellent movie. So I'm super excited to talk about it. Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about next week. Hugo, you will not be on that episode.
No, I will
with us.
unfortunately not be around, but I will let you know how I feel about the movie privately, so you can.
You've not seen
tell
it?
the people. I have not.
I guess it
seen
came out before you were born.
Yes,
you're a youngin.
Here's my question: how much do you need to know about the Batman the animated series? Because I missed it completely.
Nothing. I mean, how much do you know about Batman?
The basics,
You're
as much
set.
as you
Honestly,
can know.
You're good.
I feel like that's all you really need, and
Cool.
maybe not even that. I feel like the movie's pretty self-contained, more or less.
Yeah, but so
Great.
Yeah.
that's what we're talking about next week. We didn't say it at the top, but we're going to say it now. Please follow us at RTF_pod. Please follow us on YouTube. Please subscribe to us on all your favorite podcast services.
Or at least one.
Or at least one of us. Subscribe to all of them. And we definitely don't say this enough. Leave a review if you could on those podcast services. That's a big thing for getting the podcast seen by other people who are browsing podcasts, is having a podcast with reviews. So please leave us a review, hopefully a positive one, but reviews in general will be accepted.
Remember, be polite and the world will be right. Remember that when you're leaving your review.
You can follow me on Twitter at GoodGameGrizz and on Twitch at GoodGameGrizz, and also check out a new show I'm on the Pop XP Pop Culture Experience YouTube channel, The Week in Pop, where we talk about a variety of things, including some movies. So there's a little crossover there. You can find Josh where?
On Twitter at BroshJadley, and then on YouTube, Movies I Love, and so can you.
And Hugo Pinay.
And you can follow me on letterboxd. You can just search for Hugo P. I think it's Hugo_P. Or you can follow me on Twitter at my new handle, which is Paddington 2 is the best movie of all time, 96.
Okay, but it's not really, right? It's at
No, it's not. It's Hugo_P.
It's like you have to clear this so I can update the graphics.
It won't fit. It's too long. All right.
Well, so thank you so much for a wonderful episode, guys. Thank you to anyone watching or listening. Truly, we really do appreciate it. Just have the best week. You guys absolutely deserve it. And we will see you next time.